we'll send you the link, as well as a survey next week. And hopefully you will respond to our survey. So let's get started. I would now like to introduce Jeff. He will talk with us about the work he's doing to oversee the Healthy Streets Operations Center. Jeff has a long and highly acclaimed history in California in the nonprofit community. Many of you knew him when he was the executive director of Community Housing Partnership, and then he went on to do that same work at Hamilton Family Services. In January of 2016, then Mayor Lee appointed Jeff as the director of the newly developed Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. He built that department from the ground up, including the design and implementation of the Rising Up initiative. His plan all along had been to retire in January of this year, but Mayor Breed, because of Jeff is kind of indispensable, she asked him to stay on and oversee the reframing of the Healthy Streets Operations Center. And once the pandemic started, Jeff's entire focus for that organization, Healthy Streets Operations Center, became encampment resolution. And I will let Jeff take it from there.
Thank you, Kathie, and good afternoon, everybody. Kathie did a good introduction. The only thing I'll say is I'm not planning on retiring. I was just planning on retiring from the city and going back to work in the nonprofit sector. Told Ed Lee and promised my wife that I would stay in until January of 2020 when Mayor Lee, rest his soul, would have been out of office. And I'm sticking around for a year and a half more than I promised my wife. But here I am, Healthy Streets Operate, and I'm just going to give a very brief presentation. The Healthy Streets Operations Center is a 14-department collaboration that I helped start when I was the director of HSH. The purpose was to respond more effectively to unsheltered street homelessness, and more specifically to kind of the intersection between unsheltered street homelessness and quality of life in the city. We actually were quite effective. When we started, there were 1,200 tents and 49 or 50 large homeless encampments in San Francisco, and that was in 2017. By the end of 2018, there were under 400 tents and no large encampments in the city. And we did that with the best that we could with a services first approach, always making sure, and that this was the key part of the collaboration and continues to be, is that our service providers from the city are the first people on scene, and that law enforcement is only used as a last resort. And that Public Works comes in and kind of cleans up encampments or any debris that's around after folks have been relocated to a place of safety. And despite the fact that conditions on the streets weren't great or perfect, and that San Francisco is still struggling with homelessness, we were quite effective. We're replicated by quite a few cities. And also we'll say, even though homelessness went up by about 18% during the time the department was formed, we had the lowest increase of any major city on the West Coast. And just by way of example, Oakland had a 99% increase during that same period. LA had a 45% increase. Portland and Seattle both saw 30% plus increases. San Jose saw a 50% increase. Honolulu about the same. So not getting worse. As bad as everybody else isn't like necessarily something I wrote home to my mom about, but nonetheless, the department, did its best, and I've had some good successes. Healthy Streets Operations Center, however, really started to flounder in 2019. There were some strategic mistakes that were made. Myself and 8 department heads went to New York City to a program sponsored by Harvard to think about how to correct the ship. And then one of the things we came back with was that there needed to be one person in charge. Before that, there were 4 different kind of incident commanders, and that we needed a manager for the program. And I'm just being very honest here, is very similar to my experience running the department. Nobody else wanted the job. I can understand why. And Mayor Breed asked if I would stick around for a while and be the first manager of HSOC, which I agreed to. I love Mayor Breed professionally and personally, and I think her narrative is a powerful one, and she's been a great person to work for. And as my wife refers to her as my my dysfunctional work-wife relationship, Mayor Breed got me to stick around, and I'm glad that I did. For a whole variety of reasons. I work with a great team, but nobody, of course, was prepared for the growing pandemic. This was sort of transition was announced, I think, in February, and we all had our eyes towards what was happening in China, and nobody would have expected that we got to where we were. By April of 2020, things had changed dramatically on the streets. We had about 80, I think it was 82 or 90 large encampments and about 1,300 tents on the street. So things actually became worse than they had been in 2016. Really hard, frankly, for many of us to sit and watch 3 or 4 years of work evaporate in 6 weeks, and also really hard for the people who are living on the streets, and really hard for people who are housed that are in neighborhoods that are highly impacted. So some of why that occurred is really 3 main reasons. One is we believe that there's been an increase of 10 to 20% increase in homelessness due to economic fallout that happened almost immediately due to shelter in place. The other reason is that the city lost 1,500 shelter beds due to the need to create social distancing in our shelter system. That was like 70% of the shelter system was and continues to be taken offline. And the third reason, which is the only reason that's good, is that the city followed CDC guidance around not disrupting homeless encampments. Because tents basically serve as masks. Walk around wearing to protect people, both the people in the tents and the people outside the tents. And I'm proud that the city accepted the reality. From a public health perspective, it was the right to do. Also, I'm not sure why we don't toot our horn more about this. San Francisco has the lowest rate of spread and the lowest mortality rate of any large municipality in the United States, and we're the second densest. And we also have the second highest testing rate of any large city in the United States. So we have a lot to be proud of. The work that we're doing from a public health perspective has worked, but it did create challenging conditions on the streets. But now we're sort of coming out of that a bit. The city did a few things. They started right away, but it really started to bear fruit in June. One is that we started opening up a large number of hotels for unsheltered people. We opened up new shelter for unsheltered people who are qualified based on FEMA guidelines as high risk individuals for COVID. The hotels don't go to everybody; they go to folks who meet the FEMA and state eligibility guidelines. And then started opening up shelters. And one of the things that I'm really proud of that I didn't get to do when I was at the homeless department, but I did get to do in this new job, is we started what we call safe sleeping villages, or really sanctioned tent encampments, where people are allowed to set up their tents. They're kind of like outdoor shelters. And then the city also reissued guidelines, called them safe sleeping guidelines, in partnership with both the public health department and the city attorney, around what was okay and what was not okay on the streets, and how we can enforce those things through a services first model. Since that time, we have resolved, which is a fancy way of saying just going to close down 42 large homeless encampments. And by large, I mean 6 or more people in them, or tents, sorry. That's 42 since June 10th. There's still about 49 remaining, but it was a pretty impressive body of work. We've provided over 750 people placements into shelter, safe sleeping sites, or hotels. We have a very long way to go, but we've seen a significant reduction in the number of tents on the street. We're now below 1,000 again. And I think there's 48 large encampments still remaining in the city. And it's a fluid situation, but I'm so proud of my team and just want to point out, and it's from 14 different departments, you know, the paramedics, police, HSH staff, some nonprofit staff, MTA, traffic control officers, and public works employees are out on the streets every day, putting their own health at risk, especially now that it's so smoky out. And I asked them if they wanted to take the afternoon off because of the smoke, and they were like, absolutely not. We got work to do, Jeff. Just so proud of the compassion, and was on a call the other day with the local homeless coordinating board, and some homeless advocates from the Coalition on Homelessness were there, and really got some, they had their complaints, but got some high praise from them, which really meant a lot to me in terms of the way in which the Healthy Streets Operations Center is now moving through the world. One of the big differences has also been we're collaborating a lot more closely with nonprofit organizations on the ground, and that's made a lot of difference. And we're just going to keep at it. And then the last thing I'll say is the other thing that we do when we don't have enough shelter beds to offer people, we're doing outreach and education and cleaning in the encampments, providing people with protective equipment, PPE, and getting food and water to folks, trying to get them to social distance and follow the safe sleeping guidelines and get people connected to services. It's kind of frustrating when that's all we can do and we can't get people into shelter or places of safety. But I will say we're running on smoke like every day. We're like scrapping, we're clawing for resources just to get enough to do what we need to do that day. And if we had enough, we'd be able to do 10 encampments a week. Right now, we're only doing about 3 resolutions a week, and then the other time we're doing 7 or 8 outreach and cleaning operations. So I'll leave it at that. Kathie, I hope I didn't talk too long, but that's an overview of where we're at. Oh, and I should also just add really quickly, sorry, Kathie, I forgot this part, but it's on the top of my mind. Kathie and Sherilyn and many other people on the phone, we all worked together to come up with the Rising Up campaign to see a dramatic reduction in youth homelessness. Sherilyn will talk more about the program, but I do want to say, you know, I've been doing this work for coming up on 30 years now, and I am, I don't know what the right word is, horrified, heartbroken is the right word, at what I see on the streets now compared to what I saw even 10 years ago. The level of trauma and pain and illness and desperation is like nothing I have ever seen. And like I said, I've been doing this work for a long time. There's a lot of things we need to do to stop that. It's embarrassing to me that our country has so many people on the streets who are so sick, suffering. A big reason that is, in my opinion, is because homelessness has gone on for just too long in this city, and in this country. And because we didn't fix it, we're seeing when we've had many opportunities to do so, people are getting sicker and sicker on the streets, and more struggling more and more with behavioral health issues. You know, like every year on the street takes such a huge toll on people's physical and mental health. And I see it unfolding every day. It's not like there's more people becoming homeless. It's just that the people who are out there are incredibly sick. And the demographers were somewhat callously predicting that in the next 10 years, homelessness, as we know it now, was going to go away, because the cohort of people who became homeless in the late 70s and early 80s were all going to die. And they came in during rough economic times and during a rough housing market and a tight job market, and this cohort of people became homeless. But now what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in youth homelessness and youth housing instability across the country. It's the second bubble in the bell curve. And if we don't do something about that, like now or 5 years ago, it's just going to get worse. There's no way that this problem is going to get better if we don't address it with young folks and with families. And it's just going to be a second huge wave of what we're seeing now, 10 years from now. So I'm really proud to have been part of Rising Up and to work with Sherilyn and all the other nonprofits that have been working on this, and the other city partners that have been working on it, First Place for Youth and many other city departments and nonprofits, Third Street, I don't know if they're on, just really great organizations doing this, because we have to get a handle on this problem like right now. because none of us should have to see and experience what's happening on the streets. And more importantly, there just shouldn't be all these sick people out on the streets suffering the way that they are. It's just heartbreaking and embarrassing. But I am super hopeful that in San Francisco, at least, we're going to continue on this trajectory of reducing youth and family homelessness, which we've been doing for the past 5 years or so. We've seen good numbers, but it's not enough. And Rising Up is hopefully going to get us closer to the enough that we need, so that we're not a city that sees this double bell curve in the demographics of homeless people, that we can nip this in the bud now and see a dramatic reduction in youth homelessness, so that we can give these folks, the young people, an opportunity to be successful and to be their best selves, and that we can attend to the folks who are currently on the streets now, suffering, who desperately need our help. And I don't want one young person who's either housing unstable or homeless now to be in like my line of sight in HSOC 10 years from now, or whoever's running HSOC 10 years from now. That just shouldn't be the case. We can do better, and I know we're going to do better, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you all very much for inviting me. It's really an honor to have been asked.
Jeff, thank you. Very, very compelling. And actually, let's meet a few of these young people right now that through Jeff's and Sherilyn's program that they started, Rising Up, have been helped. We have a very short video that we're going to show you that features a couple of those young people.
We shouldn't have to fight for housing for low-income people.
I want to have a home. Like, I'm tired of this, like, temporal, like, I don't know where I'm living. I'm just going by. I want to ground myself. I want to make my foundations.
We're youth, and it's like, this is how we're going to start off life in tragedy.
When I actually stepped on the park bench for the first time, like, that was like my reality. Like, damn, bro, like, this is real homelessness.
Rising Up is based on this methodology of housing first. What does that term, what does that saying, housing first, mean to you?
To me, it means you're taking away the barriers that many of our youth and young adults come into the program with. We focus on getting that lease, getting those keys, moving into the unit.
When she gave me the keys, I was like, I'm that man. Like, I know, like, I see my future now. It's so clear. Like, it felt really good. It felt really good to be like, okay, yo, like, this is a major stepping stone in your life.
With rapid rehousing, it's as rapid as we can make it, right? It's a fast track, really, if we look at it that way, to make sure that young people are provided with housing as soon as possible. They get their own place, they get privacy, which is key, especially to their development right now.
Privacy is a big thing. I think, you know, like, when you're homeless, nothing's private. I couldn't wait to be housed and, you know, have my own room, use my own bathroom.
I have a room where it's just me. You know, I have a room where I go to be me in my room. And then I have a room where I entertain, and I have a room where I eat. Like, it feels real good. It feels good. It feels like, okay, I'm getting a dough.
I finally got a home, man. It's something that I haven't been able to say. Like, okay, I'm going home right now. I haven't been able to say that in years.
Thank you. I'd like to now introduce Sherilyn, who, with the context that Jeff has set, will talk with us about the Rising Up initiative, what it is and why it's important and our next steps for it. Sherilyn, as I mentioned earlier, many of you know her. She has been involved in social services work throughout California, actually, for over 30 years. She became executive director of Larkin Street Youth Services in 2005. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, since that time, Sherilyn has established herself as, on the local, state, and national level, as one of our most important voices on behalf of young people. Sherilyn.
Thanks, Kathie. Thanks, everyone. So glad to have a chance to be with you all here today. Thanks, Jeff. I always enjoy listening to you, even when much of the news or some of the news that you are delivering is so incredibly heartbreaking. So thank you for your continued work on behalf of folks experiencing homelessness, and especially for all the work that you've been doing at HSOC following your leadership, great leadership at HSH. I'm in Tahoe right now because we're sort of on vacation. And I just, so if the internet gets wobbly, please somebody chat me and let me know, as it's really unstable up here. So Rising Up, as Jeff mentioned, is an initiative by Mayor Bree to reduce youth homelessness by 50% by 2023. Since the beginning, and since the since the beginning of Rising Up, we have believed that to be and focused that on ending homelessness for LGBT and youth of color on a path for ending it for all. So racial equity and LGBT equity has been a part of all of our work in addressing and seeking to change the trajectory of young people at risk for or experiencing homelessness here in San Francisco. So we launched into a couple of, somebody's not able to hear, sorry. I'm sorry, I got a little distracted by the chat. So we launched this a couple of years ago. And it is a partnership between a number of city departments and all of the youth providers in San Francisco, or the most that work with young people experiencing homelessness or young people at risk for homelessness. Our partners include, Jeff mentioned a few of them, 3rd Street Youth Center and Clinic, First Place for Youth, 5 Keys, Homeless Youth Alliance, At the Crossroads, Lyric, Larkin Street, Huckleberry Youth Programs, and the Center. Hopefully I did not forget anyone. And we really came together both through the initiative in the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project a number of years ago to think about how we could really work together with the city to reduce youth homelessness, and Rising Up was sort of born out of that. Steph, you can switch the slide now. So Rising Up seeks to address problem solve or prevent homelessness for about 450 young people, and to house through rapid rehousing, as you heard Joy and the young people talk about, serve about 500 young people. And that the rapid rehousing is both, as Joy mentioned in the video, about rapidly getting young people into housing who are currently experiencing homelessness, and getting those folks housed and working with them to have a subsidy for up to 3 years. There's a maximum amount on the subsidy, which is about $27,000, a little over $27,000 total in the subsidy, and then connect them with employment and other supports to ensure that they can start to take over their rent and eventually exit off of the subsidy and stay in the housing that they have. Some of the housing is young people who live alone, some are for young families, and some are young people who are in roommate situations. Problem solving and prevention is both the kinds of things that is conversations with young people, working to get young people assessed for coordinated entry. So another big part of Rising Up was really to help and work with all of us to work with the city to implement coordinated entry for young people, which is really about a way of assessing young people's housing needs, what ways we might be able to prevent or quickly address young people's homelessness, and then how do we prioritize young people for the housing options that exist within the continuum of housing available for young people. Rising Up seeks to add to that housing portfolio, as well as to align that rapid rehousing with our existing offerings for young people, which is supportive housing, transitional housing, and scattered site housing for young people. And you can see on the slide the ultimate goals that we have around young people that receive problem solving support remain stably housed 90%, and for young people in rapid rehousing that we have an 85% success rate. Next slide. So to date, we have worked with a total of about 268 young people. The problem solving conversations are across those 244 young people, and that is both about working with young people again to identify about where they can stay, what kinds of solutions might exist for them, what can we help to do to address their either risk for homelessness or their existing homelessness. We've been able to move folks. 44 have received sort of move-in assistance, other kinds of things that will help, or back rent, other kinds of things that will help them stay housed. You might think about, well, why 244 conversations and 44 resolutions? A part of that is it takes a lot of conversations to get somebody, and many people, and then to talk with folks and to get folks into the specific problem solving efforts or resolutions. That 44 is about very specific to the problem solving resolutions that we fund through the city funds and some private funds. Other folks may have been through those problem solving conversations, connected with other supports, or we are currently working with them to help resolve. So just know that it's actually pretty successful that we've gotten 44 folks out of those conversations. And then we have currently 163 youth housed. Most of those are single adults or couples, but there are about 25 families in that number as well. And we have 57 young people in housing search. I think I neglected to mention one of our key partners, which is Brilliant Corners, who Brilliant Corners is excellent at being able to help find housing young people, broker the sort of deals with the landlords and property owners, so that we're able to sort of, as they call it, take down units and bring units online. I think I want to talk a little bit now about how we've been moving through COVID, through the rising up and being able to continue rising up. I think it's really important to note that all through the past 4 or 5 months, we've been able to continue to move young people into housing. So the 157 folks, or the number that are folks that are housed, a little bit higher than that, that continued throughout the pandemic. So case managers were working with young people on addressing sort of things that they need to move into housing. The housing coordinators and navigators on the part of Brilliant Corners were continuing to find units. For young people in the problem solving and young people who we are working with on that aspect, or in the emergency side of the house, if you will, that is where there was a lot of unmet need. In part, as Jeff mentioned, shelter capacity was, new shelter intakes were stopped around the end of March because we needed to create, this was so that we could reduce capacity and make sure that shelters were operating safely. We were focused on bringing folks into hotels, in the shelter-in-place hotels, which you have probably heard a lot about, but you have to be at risk for COVID complications, medically at risk, to be eligible at that time. So for a lot of young people, there was not a lot of places that they could come inside. So we worked a lot. One of the beautiful things in this very challenging time has been that because of rising up, because of the work that the youth system had been doing, the city, HSH and their youth staff, the staff focused on young people, and GPH, and all of the youth providers, we really came together to effectively address as much as we could the needs of young people who are experiencing homelessness. So worked hard to get them into emergency placements in hotels, worked hard to be able to get where our center was open, our drop-in center was open, so staff from other sites could come and work directly with young people on problem solving, on getting them inside, on starting their housing search, getting them assessed for rapid rehousing and supportive housing. So that was really a very positive ways in which we were able to work together in an enormously difficult and challenging environment. For young people in rising up that were housed, many of them experienced, as did many of our young people in housing, sort of significant increases in depression and anxiety, in suicide ideation, right? Clearly that, being inside, sheltering in place is hard for all of us. It is especially hard for young people who have previously experienced homelessness. it also, for young people, there was a loss of wages. So we saw job loss, hours lost, young people furloughed. So they needed more help with and an increase in their subsidy amount to be able to sustain their housing. And there has been significant increase in food insecurity. So we needed to do a lot to get young people food cards, make sure they were able to get what they needed, especially folks living in our scattered site housing who were not housed with us in our congregate settings. And so many of those folks are obviously folks in Rising Up. We are, as we think about sort of, and I was on a panel Monday hearing about the work that's happening in the state of Connecticut and presenting on a bit of what was happening in San Francisco, and heard from a lot of young people, very similar, in Connecticut, very similar stories to what we heard from folks in Rising Up or folks that we're working with in prevention and problem solving, right? Just how hard it is to be outside all the time, and ways in which you used to be able to go, maybe an open business would give you a cup of water, or maybe you could use their restroom. Just don't exist now, and everything is so shut down. So really that toll that takes on young people that are still outside. And then for folks who are housed, but had now this job loss and this worry about like, what's going to happen? What's, you know, how am I going to get my next job? So really, you know, just things that are universally happening, I think, for young people. Going forward, we are really thinking about and continuing to think about how to connect young people to employment, what will need to change about that, what will need to be the level of more intense services, employment-related services for young people. Rising Up, one of the things that we did right before the pandemic was make a decision with some of the private funds, the steering committee, to support a focused job placement or job developer in the East Bay, that First Place for Youth is working on. So how can we extend housing or employment opportunities for young people living in the East Bay? I think going forward, we are also moving forward with having more roommate placements and working hard on working with young people on developing skills and talents for living with a roommate, because that's a thing we all have to learn how to do, or many of us have learned how to do. And we've also been doing a lot of work around financial literacy and sustainability. So young people have been, we've been working out with that through the Office of Financial Empowerment in the city to build those skills in budgeting and money management skills with young people. And then I anticipate, you know, on the prevention and problem solving, that we will need to continue to deepen the work there and to do more, be able to offer a wider array of prevention and problem solving in place as we open up from shelter in place, that young people who have been living in really untenable situations due to you know, trying to shelter in place, maybe with family or with others that are really not safe and have not had a way to get safe, right? School, high school is often, or school is a sanctuary. Schools also can be a place where you can get help. Or we've heard from folks that are living, they're 18, 19, 20, that might be living in untenable situations. And those, I think, they'll start to fall out of those situations and into the street. And so we are continuously thinking about how to be more flexible. And that is really where we use the private dollars that we raise, that are raised through Rising Up, is to offer more flexible solutions to young people going forward. I will pause because I have probably exceeded my time and turn over to questions.
This is good. Yes, thank you, Sherilyn. That's exactly, it was, again, like Jeff's remarks, very compelling. And we already do have one question, a very good question. How fast is rapid rehousing, and how is COVID impacting housing placements? Let's start there.
Sure, thanks Elvis for the question. Well, there is huge variance. Some people get in housing search and find housing very quickly. A lot of that depends on how fast folks were able to get sort of document ready, right? We try to reduce barriers, but really how fast folks can get the kinds of documents that they're going to need to show to a landlord. So and that can happen quickly if they're more local. It may be harder if those documents exist in another city or state. So it can happen in a month or less. For some young people, they're in housing search for longer. The roommate matching process takes some time, so that can slow that down as well. Brilliant Corners, our housing partner, has been able to get keep units coming and keep taking down units, like I've said, and so that slowed down a bit in COVID initially, but now is sort of back and at a good pace. They're doing virtual tours. There's been a number of things that have been helped to expedite that process. I see another question.
Yeah, this was submitted in advance by Carla Javits.
Yeah, so I saw it.
It's actually how ill, not how ill. Sorry.
It's okay. How is San Francisco's response to homelessness different in the aftermath of the pandemic, and how is the city using CARES Act funding? I don't know, Jeff, do you want to take how the city's response to homelessness is different in the aftermath?
Sure. So I'll just want to be clear, I don't work for the homelessness department anymore. I'm kind of a very singular focus, and I'm not setting policy for the city. So I'll share with you what I know, but please know this isn't like the official city response. But I also hopefully will only say things that are correct. So a couple things are different. Obviously, with the closing down of shelters, the whole system of care doesn't flow the way it used to, with people coming from the streets to navigation centers to housing. We just have so fewer people in shelters. And then even though we have stood up a lot of hotel units, I think 2,600 now, many of them are for people who aren't necessarily homeless, but who are unstably housed or in SROs and couldn't shelter in place. And some are for frontline workers as well. So we didn't come close to replacing what we had lost. So we're dealing with a lot of people on the streets. But longer term, and how are we using the CARES Act and other resources? Primarily it's being used to fund the hotels and the additional shelters that have been put into place. Long term, there's some exciting stuff happening. The city is planning to purchase some of the hotels that we're currently leasing and turn them into permanent housing, which is great. The mayor has announced wanting to bring 4,000 more units of housing for people experiencing homelessness online. Some of that's dependent on some legislation or ballot measures passing in November. The other thing that's exciting but scary at the same time is that the city's made a commitment that once somebody gets into one of these temporary shelters that we've stood up, or safe sleeping sites or hotels, that we're not going to have those folks go back out onto the streets again. So plans are being set to make sure everybody's in coordinated entry, that people who are eligible for housing get into housing, and that we find safe places for everybody to land. Because goodness, if you can imagine what happens when the hotels start closing down, which won't be for a while, it won't probably be till sometime next year, but having 2,600 people with no place to go back out onto the streets is not a good, won't be a good outcome. So that's, I think, important. And I'm also really excited that the city is finally trying the safe sleeping program, these sanctioned encampments. And I think that's, they have been incredibly successful and will continue. So there's a lot of positive stuff going on, but it's also pretty frightening. Then the other thing I'll just add about kind of looking over the horizon, we're starting to see families, family homelessness, I think, and this is just my eyeballs, not from data. It appears to me that family homelessness in RVs might be on the rise. We're starting to see a lot more people in RVs who are, and some, have made the decision that this is just a better move for them, but it's probably not the best move for their kids, but they don't have other economic choices. So we're probably going to need to dig into that issue. And in fact, I have a call on Monday I'm doing a special project I was asked just to jump in on besides HSOC. I'm working with the community in the Bayview to try to address this problem. So we've brought in the school district and the Department of Children, Youth and Families and HSH to try to address it. So there's a lot going on. And I would say from an HSOC perspective, though, just ask that people are patient, because before we were pretty much able to have a steady flow of navigation center and shelter beds to address encampments or address unsheltered homelessness. And now, like I said, it's like day by day, we're just seeing what's available. And the city's working to add more. I think there's 2 new hotels opening up next week, which is great. But it takes a lot of staff time and it takes a lot of staff. You know, the nonprofits who are running these folks have to staff up, and it's hard, but I feel like we've turned a corner towards the good, and that things will continue to improve throughout the year.
Thank you, Jeff.
I'll add a little bit, Kathie, around some of that, if you don't mind. And I went off video, folks, because my internet went super unstable. But I can still see you. So I would say I work on the broad supporting Jeff's comments that the goal is really to make sure that nobody who went into a SIP hotel or a safe sleeping site. Larkin Street supports, along with Homeless Youth Alliance, a safe sleeping site in the Haight, which is not solely for young people, but is really for folks who were living in the Haight, living outside, living in the Haight. And they've come inside, and the safe sleeping sites have been an incredible place for folks to get to have moments to breathe, and like really seeing incredible, great work happening at the safe sleeping site called the Camp in the Haight, in ways then we can start to get folks connected and into longer term housing solutions. We also have a shelter in place hotel for medically vulnerable young people that has 50 young people in that site. And there really is a commitment that folks who went into and moved into those shelter in place hotels will not be returned to homelessness. And that is a huge sort of focus of the mayor's plan and a huge focus of work that we've been doing. And that's great. It does mean that we really have to think about sort of family and youth homelessness, because most families and most young people don't meet that criteria. So the expansion of, for young people, rapid rehousing subsidies, flexible housing subsidies are really the ways in which we're going to be able to continue to work to address homelessness. I saw in the chat a question from Pam about voucher programs, and I'm not sure if you're meaning the Section 8 voucher programs or increasing flexible housing subsidies for folks, but the Department of Housing and the city are really trying for a variety of solutions to address homelessness, including more subsidies, including increased prevention and problem solving, and including purchasing some of the hotels. Pam, did you want to add?
No, that's great, because that answers it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I want to make sure we end on time. Thank you, everybody, for the questions that you submitted now and in advance. We will, as I mentioned, we'll be sending out the recording and other associated materials and a survey we hope you will complete. Now I want to turn this over to Miriam Mudroglu, who will share some thoughts of her own and close today's session. Many of you are here today because of Miriam, and you know, as I do, that she is, as I said, a community activist and philanthropist supreme. She's deeply involved in making San Francisco a better city for all of us. Miriam, over to you.
Kathie, thank you for the kind words. Good afternoon, everyone. Sherilyn and Jeff, thank you for speaking to us today. You both have been on the forefront working for our city for so many years, and we are truly grateful for your commitment and for being here today. And thank you for all who joined us today. We appreciate your interest and engagement and support for this important work. As many of you know, I'm committed to Rising Up, and actually originally brought on by Jeff himself to be a part of this initiative. He told me at the time, if we do not get these youth off the streets, they will end up homeless and helpless, and as he mentioned earlier. As a mother of 2 boys, ages 21 and 18, I could not imagine similar aged young boys and girls out on the streets, hungry, homeless, assaulted physically and sexually, and fearing their lives. They've all experienced adversity, trauma, and stress throughout their childhood, and just need someone to mentor them in the right direction. As my boys are getting ready to go back to college next week, especially during a pandemic, which will be interesting, I think about all that we do as parents to guide them through every step of the way. Just like our own kids, these young people we are serving all have their own dreams and aspirations. They all want to get a job, go to school, and become productive members of our society. But many of them have not had these same opportunities, guidance, and family support, especially during these challenging times that we are all facing today. I want to tell you about what the progress we have had with Rising Up. Stephanie, if we can go to the slide. So the next steps for Rising Up. We have already housed nearly 200 young people to date. We built a great amount of momentum just in the past 6 months. We've supported another 48 young people to avoid homelessness altogether. And the goal is to house 500 total youths by 2023. Rising Up's budget is about $35 million. We have raised $17.5 million to date, and we have $17.5 to go to house 300 more young people. We hope that we can reach out to you individually and discuss further Rising Up's potential and how that may fit in your giving potential. We know that you're all continued supportive funders in our community and have done so much. And we understand that this may not be in the scope of your giving, but we'd like to be able to discuss that with you. And we are looking for transformational gifts to try to make a difference and get these youths off the streets. We are available for any questions. Our emails are included, and we appreciate your attendance today. And I wanted to give a little bit more time for questions because I know through the interaction I'm having with some that there are other burning questions that can be addressed to Jeff and Sherilyn, and I want to make sure we have a little bit more time. But these roundtables are meant to be educational, and we hope to continue to do that. And if you have interest for us to continue these roundtables, please respond to the surveys that will be sent out to you afterwards by Kathie.
And we do have about 5 minutes left. I want to honor everyone's time. Are there any closing thoughts or remarks or questions that people have? Okay, I will take that as a no. We thank you so much for participating today. It matters to us that people are interested in hearing about the young people and hearing about what's going on in the city from two experts. And there will be more. And so look for invitations coming in the additional invitations coming in the coming months. Thank you again for your participation today, and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.